On a blazing summer afternoon in Phoenix, sunlight poured over the cracked sidewalk like molten glass. Emma, tight red dress clinging to her from the heat, held the hand of little Sophie, wrapped in her pastel pink jacket, jeans and brown boots, as they approached the abandoned house she'd just bought for $256. But the moment they stepped onto the sagging porch, Max, their loyal German shepherd, froze. Ears up, body rigid, breath held. The summer air went strangely still. Max let out a low, warning growl, deep enough to make Emma pull Sophie closer. Sunlight washed across the doorway, yet one corner behind the house refused to brighten, as if the shadows there were choosing to stay. Something shifted inside that darkness, watching them. Neighbors whispered that this house held secrets no one had ever solved. Emma didn't believe in ghosts, only in hope. But when Max took a step back, lips lifting ever so slightly, she understood one thing. This $256 house was hiding far more than rotting wood. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. The summer heat in Phoenix didn't simply rise. It pressed down like a molten hammer. Streets shimmered, mirages rippled along the asphalt, and the air itself felt grainy with dust and sun. Phoenix in midsummer could turn even the hardiest souls quiet, but it never broke Emma Turner. At least, not on the outside. Emma, 28, slender to the point of looking fragile, moved through the heat with a kind of determined grace. Her skin was lightly tanned from long walks to and from work, her dark hair tied back neatly, and her eyes, sharp brown, unwavering, always carried that mix of exhaustion and defiance that people who had struggled too long often wore. She always wore the same fitted bright red dress. It wasn't fancy. It was cheap, second-hand, but kept immaculate. It hugged her figure because it was one of the few things she owned that still made her feel capable, visible, human. It was her work outfit at the small roadside diner on West Marigold Street, where truckers, retirees, and construction workers passed through from sunrise to sunset. The red dress had become her armor. The diner's metal fan rattled overhead as Emma stepped into the break room, its coolness a small miracle in the scorching afternoon. She pulled out her cracked phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through local listings for second-hand furniture. She usually did this on breaks, always hoping to find something cheap enough to help improve their tiny rented studio. That's when she saw it. A post on a community forum, written with mocking bold letters. Who'd be crazy enough to buy this dump for $256? Beneath it were photos of a small, sun-bleached house perched on a dusty rise at the edge of Phoenix. The roof sagged, shingles missing like broken teeth. Windows were shattered or boarded up. Tall weeds swallowed half the yard. Some neighbors had nicknamed it the Summer Ghost House. Emma enlarged each photo. Dust floated in the beams of sun slashing through broken panels. The porch leaned at a worrying angle. A once white door had turned a tired, peeling gray. Most people saw ruin. Emma saw quiet. Space. Possibility. A porch where she could sit in the evenings with her daughter, Sophie. A patch of yard where Max could run without bumping into the walls of their cramped apartment. A kitchen. Broken, yes, but not sharing a wall with people who fought every night. Sophie Turner, 6 years old, was a tiny splash of color in Emma's life. Soft blonde hair curled around her round cheeks, and her big brown eyes always seemed to shine with curiosity even when she didn't speak. Despite the heat, she always wore her pastel pink jacket, slightly oversized, sleeves brushing her fingertips, paired with light blue jeans and small brown ankle boots. She said it made her feel safe, and Emma never argued. Children needed protection wherever they could find it. And then there was Max, a 4-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur, tall, muscular, a survivor of a rescue center, where Emma had found him trembling in the corner of a kennel. Max was gentle with Emma and Sophie, almost tender in the way he nudged Sophie's hand when she was sad. But with strangers, his eyes went sharp, alert, watchful. He was a guardian by nature, and in their chaotic world, that mattered. Emma zoomed into another photo of the derelict house. She could almost imagine Sophie coloring on the porch steps. She could imagine the kitchen smelling of something warm for once. She could imagine having a front door that no landlord could threaten to lock. But her savings, barely enough. Buying this house would mean betting everything. That night, after her shift, Emma returned to the tiny studio apartment. Sophie lay curled against Max on the thin mattress beside the window. Sophie with her pink jacket still on, one hand gripping Max's fur, as though anchoring herself. Max stretched protectively around her like a living shield. The moonlight through the window was pale and thin, like everything they owned. Emma knelt beside them, brushing Sophie's hair from her forehead. "Am I saving them?" she whispered to herself. "Or walking us all into a new trap?" She barely slept. The next morning, she called the number attached to the listing. By afternoon, she sat inside a small, dusty real estate office, if it could even be called that. The man across from her was named Derek. He was in his 50s, heavy-set, with graying stubble and deep frown lines etched into his sun-weathered skin. A man shaped by long days outdoors and years of things not going his way. He wore a wrinkled plaid shirt and smelled faintly of motor oil. Derek treated the transaction like a joke, tapping the stack of papers on the table. "You sure you want it?" he asked, raising a brow. Most people don't last 10 minutes inside that place. His tone was cynical, but not cruel, more like someone who had learned not to expect much from life. Emma signed anyway. Her hand trembled as the pen touched the final page. A new beginning, or a new disaster, locked in with one looping signature. As she handed Derek the $256 in worn bills, her phone buzzed violently in her purse. A message from her landlord flashed across the screen. "We need to talk. Immediately." And just like that, as the ink dried, Emma realized the past wasn't ready to let her go. The drive toward the new house took Emma along the outskirts of Phoenix, where the city thinned into stretches of ochre dust and sunburned shrubs trembling beneath the desert heat. The afternoon sun hammered the roof of her aging sedan, its faded blue paint nearly white from years of exposure. Inside the car, warm air seeped from every seam no matter how high Emma turned the fan. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles pale, while Sophie sat in the back seat, hugging Max around the neck. Sophie in her pastel pink jacket despite the heat, light blue jeans and worn brown boots dangling above the floor. Max, the black and tan German shepherd with alert amber eyes, stood braced on the seat, tail stiff, nostrils flaring each time a gust of desert wind swept through a crack in the window. As they climbed the last rise toward the dusty hill where the house waited, Sophie leaned forward, eyes wide. "Mom, is that it?" Emma exhaled slowly as the building came into full view. The house slumped beneath the sun like a tired animal, its wooden panels warped, paint peeled into curling flakes. The front door hung crooked, held by one stubborn hinge. Long, wild stalks of grass swayed in the dry wind, brushing against the porch like fingers tapping. Yes, sweetheart, Emma answered, soft but steady. It's ours. She tried smiling, her fitted red dress clinging to her back from sweat, but the smile wavered. The moment Emma turned off the engine, Max let out a low, uncertain rumble, his ears rotating toward the far right side of the property, where a grove of scraggly mesquite trees cast long shadows across the dirt. Sophie noticed his tension. Max doesn't like it, she whispered, leaning closer to him. Emma opened the door, heat slamming into her like a wall. She forced her voice light. He's just curious. New smells. But even she wasn't fully convinced. The front porch groaned under Sophie's small boots as she stepped up, testing each board. Dust puffed up around her like golden smoke. It sounds like it's talking, she giggled nervously. Crying, maybe, Emma murmured under her breath. She fit the old rusted key into the lock. It resisted at first, scraping like metal on bone, then yielded suddenly. The door swung inward with a drawn-out shriek. A rush of musty air, mildewed wood, old paper, and something older rose to greet them. Inside, the house swallowed the light. Sunbeams filtered through shattered window frames and the warped slats that someone had nailed over them long ago. They sliced the room into glowing stripes, each filled with dust drifting like tiny drifting worlds. Emma stepped forward cautiously, her red dress brushing against debris. Max sniffed the air, muscles taut, moving ahead in slow, deliberate steps, his tail lowered in wary concentration. Sophie held on to his fur, half hiding behind him. The living room was stripped bare, save for an overturned chair and the skeletal remains of a shelf. The kitchen, visible through a warped doorway, looked worse. Cabinets rotted and dangling like broken limbs. The bathroom down the hall smelled of rust and abandonment. Sophie's steps hesitated. Mom, what if we just go back today? Emma turned, kneeling to cup Sophie's cheek. Honey, houses can look scary before they're fixed, but we're going to make this one ours. Her voice was soft but firm, the voice of a mother who had already made the decision long before arriving here. A voice from outside startled them. Hey, you're the one who bought this place? Emma spun around, instinctively shielding Sophie. On the other side of the fence stood Mrs. Eleanor Miller, a neighbor who appeared to be about 70. She was tall for her age, with a sturdy frame, sun-spotted skin, and wispy silver hair tucked under a large beige sun hat. She wore gardening gloves and held a watering can decorated with faded sunflower stickers. Her expression, however, was far from cheerful. Her light gray eyes carried years of weariness and caution. Emma approached politely. Yes, ma'am, I did. Mrs. Miller's lips tightened. Then I suppose you should know that house has history, not the good kind. Emma stiffened. What do you mean? Mrs. Miller stepped closer, leaning against the fence. It's been abandoned for years. Owners came and went. Some tried fixing it. None stayed. They all said, well, that something in there didn't feel right. She gave a dismissive shake of her head, though her gaze remained troubled. People hear things. Doors opening. Tools moved. I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in bad memories. Sophie clutched Emma's dress, eyes huge. Max stared past Mrs. Miller, nose twitching toward the overgrown backyard where a collapsed wooden shed slumped like a dying animal. The sunlight seemed to stop just short of that corner, as if refusing to touch it. A deep unease crept down Emma's spine, but she lifted her head. "Thank you, ma'am. But we'll be okay. We have to be." Mrs. Miller sighed, her lined face softening a little. "You seem determined. Just be careful." Then she turned and walked slowly toward her own yard, her steps steady despite her age. Emma returned inside, brushing aside her nerves. She crouched to pick up a stray board, then froze. Sophie screamed from the living room. "Mom! Max! Max is gone!" Emma rushed out. Max's collar lay on the dusty floorboards, still warm. The back door, which Emma could have sworn was firmly shut, now hung open, swaying slightly in the hot wind. The tattered curtain lifted and fell like a breathing creature. Max, her guardian, Sophie's protector, had vanished into the very part of the house that even the sun avoided. Evening settled slowly over the Phoenix hillside, the sunlight stretching long golden fingers across the backyard as Emma stepped out the back door with Sophie's small hand wrapped tightly in hers. Her red dress clung to her with dust and sweat from the day's work, and Sophie's pastel pink jacket seemed to glow faintly under the slanting light. Max stood ahead of them, rigid as stone. His black and tan fur bristled along his spine, and his deep amber eyes fixed unblinking on the collapsed wooden shed at the far end of the yard. Emma followed his gaze. The shed leaned heavily to one side, its roof sunken, planks warped, and peeling paint clinging like old scabs. A single rusted hinge held the crooked door in place, trembling in the wind as though ready to fall apart at the slightest push. As they approached, the air grew hotter and drier, as if the shed swallowed the remaining daylight around it. Then, from nowhere, Max burst out of the mesquite bush beside the shed, snarling, a low, thunderous sound, and positioned himself in front of Emma and Sophie. His stance was wide, protective, almost desperate in its intensity. Emma froze. Sophie gasped. The shepherd's teeth showed just enough to issue a warning, but his eyes were locked not on them, but on the shed. Something inside it had rattled him. "Okay, okay," Emma whispered, slowly pulling Sophie back toward the porch steps. Max stayed between them and the shed, growling steadily. And then, thud. Something heavy fell inside the structure. Dust puffed from the cracks between the boards. Emma's heart pounded so loudly she could feel it in her throat, but she forced herself to stand firm, staring at the leaning shed while the sunset bled into purple. Max growled until the sound faded, then backed slowly toward them, never turning his back on the shed. The days that followed settled into an exhausting but strangely hopeful routine. Each morning, Emma worked her shift at the diner in her carefully pressed red dress, meeting customers with polite smiles and tired eyes. At noon, she read articles and repair manuals on her phone during breaks, studying everything from replacing drywall to reinforcing floor beams. By afternoon, the clean version of the red dress had become the dust-covered, work-stained version as she threw herself into repairing the house. Sophie, ever determined to help despite her small hands and trembling boots, collected stray nails and screws. She sorted pieces of wood by size, carrying them with both arms wrapped tight like treasures. Max, now fully invested in the labor of rebuilding, dragged lightweight trash bags across the floor with his jaws, occasionally nudging Emma's leg whenever she overexerted herself. One late evening, golden hour fading into the cooled lavender of desert twilight, Emma tugged at a rotted kitchen cabinet. The hinges groaned. Dust rained. A spider scurried from beneath the broken counter. Disgusting, she muttered, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Sophie sat nearby on an overturned crate, swinging her booted feet as she watched, Max at her side like a loyal shadow. Suddenly, as the last piece of the cabinet came loose, Sophie whispered, "Mom, what's that?" She pointed toward a wooden plank on the floor walk that seemed out of place. It sagged slightly, edges not flush with the rest of the flooring. Emma knelt, pressing her hand against it. The plank gave way just a little. "A hidden hatch?" she breathed. She pried the loose board aside. Beneath it was a dark gap, a narrow opening just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. A stale, warm breath of air rose from below, smelling of earth, old lumber, and secrets that had been locked away too long. Max approached cautiously, standing at the edge of the opening, tail stiff and posture low. His growl returned, quiet, steady, but not entirely fearful. It was more conflicted, curious, protective. Emma turned on her phone's flashlight and directed the beam downward. Wooden steps descended into darkness, 4 or 5, maybe more. Something about the stillness made sweat prickle her skin. She didn't descend. Not yet. Instead, she placed the board back over the hole and exhaled shakily. That night, after a long day of repairs, the three of them sat together in what would one day become their living room. Cardboard boxes doubled as tables. A single camping lantern cast a warm halo across the room. Emma leaned back, legs aching, and finally spoke her heart. "I bought this house because I wanted us to stop running," she said quietly. "I wanted to give you something a landlord could take away." Sophie nestled against Max, fingers buried in his thick fur. "As long as I have you and Max," she whispered, "I'm not scared." Emma felt tears sting her eyes. Outside, cicadas hummed, carrying the sounds of the Phoenix night into the half-renovated house. They lay down to sleep on thin blankets, surrounded by dust, hopes, and exhaustion. Max positioned himself at the front door, head resting between his paws, ears twitching restlessly at every distant crackle of the desert. Then, deep in the middle of the night, Max bolted upright. His bark tore through the stillness, raw, urgent, echoing across the empty house. Emma jolted awake, heart slamming against her ribs. Max was not barking toward the door, or the windows, or the yard. He was staring at the loose floorboard Emma had replaced earlier, teeth bared. And then it came. The sound. A slow, deliberate, rhythmic knock rising from beneath the floorboards. One knock. Pause. Another. And another. Something or someone was beneath the house. And it wanted out. Morning sun spilled through the battered windows like molten gold, igniting the motes of dust suspended in the air and scattering them across the living room in drifting constellations. Emma stood at the loose floorboard with one hand on Sophie's shoulder and the other gripping her phone as a flashlight. Her red-fitted dress was already dusty from kneeling on the floor, while Sophie, still wrapped in her pastel pink jacket, jeans, and brown boots, clung to Max's collar. The German shepherd stood stiffly, his fur raised just slightly along his spine, but his stance steady and protective. After the knocking beneath the floor the previous night, no one had slept deeply. The cellar hatch seemed even darker now in daylight, as if the sun refused to reach those wooden steps descending into earth. But Emma inhaled hard and bent down. "We have to see what's down there," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. She lifted the board aside. The stale breath of the underground rose to greet them. Emma went first, descending carefully, her hand sliding along the rough wall to steady herself. Max followed, quiet, focused, nose twitching as he scanned every shadow. Sophie knelt at the opening, watching with wide eyes, but staying where her mother had asked. The cellar was smaller than expected, barely tall enough for Emma to stand upright. Dirt walls, uneven and cold, framed a compact space that smelled of time, old timber, and forgotten things. A faint strip of sunlight from the hatch cut across the ground, illuminating objects strewn in the far corner. A small wooden trunk sat partly buried in dust. Several rusted tools lay beside it. An old hammer, a handsaw missing teeth, coiled rope stiff with age. The trunk creaked when Emma opened it. Inside lay a stack of black and white photographs curling at the edges. Families smiling under sunlit porches. A young father carrying a little girl on his shoulders. A German shepherd, different from Max yet unmistakably proud, bounded through the yard, tail raised in sheer joy. And in one particular photo, the sunlight glowed across the very porch Emma now owned, decades younger, bright and whole. Underneath the photos was a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked, pages yellowed and fragile. Emma opened it gently. The handwriting was rough but earnest. Entries from a man named Thomas Keller, the house's former owner, a hard-working father who had lost everything to debt and desperation. His words chronicled his attempts to repair the home for his young daughter, to make it safe to give her something of her own. Near the end, the ink grew unsteady. He wrote about failing projects, sleepless nights, the weight of hope pressing on him. And his last line read, "One day, someone brave or foolish will see what I saw, and they'll turn these broken boards into a home again." Emma stood still, throat tight. "Looks like I'm the fool then," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. Max nudged her, thigh with his snout, as if affirming she wasn't alone. But the moment of warmth was short-lived. When Emma climbed back upstairs with the journal in her hand, the world outside the cellar felt heavier. Sophie met her at the top, hugging her waist, while Max bounded up and circled them protectively. Emma had barely replaced the floorboard when 3 sharp knocks sounded at the front door. It was only the mailman, but even his presence felt unsettling after the night they'd had. A stack of official-looking envelopes lay in his hand. He was a lean man in his 40s named Brian, with sandy hair tucked beneath a cap and a sunburned face that suggested years spent delivering in the Arizona heat. He had kind eyes but a hurried manner, the kind of man always balancing duty with fatigue. "Morning," he said simply. "Got a few certified notices for you." Emma's stomach dropped as she signed. Brian offered a sympathetic smile. "New homeowner? These old places come with surprises." Then he tipped his hat and continued down the road. Inside, Emma tore open the top envelope. Her heart sank. The city had scheduled an inspection. If she couldn't prove the house was structurally safe or making progress toward safety, they could condemn it. Another envelope held a harsher blow. It was from her former landlord, Mr. Clay Rector, a sharp-faced man in his 50s whose reputation for impatience was well known. Clay was tall, rigid in posture, and always looked as though he judged everything, from people to furniture, with a private dissatisfaction. His salt and pepper beard was trimmed too neatly, as if he was trying to control the few things in life still under his command. And he had never been kind to Emma. The letter threatened legal action for unpaid rent. Emma pressed a hand to her temple. Sophie sensed something was wrong and sat quietly, drawing with a crayon on a scrap of drywall, sketching a happy version of their house. Fresh roof, bright windows, flowers blooming. "It'll look like this one day," Sophie said softly. Emma worked her shift that afternoon, clinging to the edges of composure. She forced smiles at customers while her mind raced with regulations, fines, and threats she didn't have money to fight. When she came home, sweat clinging to her back and building codes clutched in her hand, a sleek black sedan sat parked in front of her house. A man stood beside it. Not the rugged, dusty look of a local. He was tall and sharply built, wearing a perfectly pressed charcoal suit that contrasted with the sun-scorched street. His skin was tanned but smooth, as if he spent more time under polished office lights than sunlight. His hair, dark, styled with precision, did not move even as the desert wind rustled. Behind his sunglasses, Emma could not read a single emotion. Max stepped forward immediately, growling low. Sophie shrank behind Emma, her pastel jacket brushing the back of her mother's red dress. The man spoke coolly. "You're Emma Turner, correct? We need to discuss this property and the land it sits on." Emma's heart dropped. The $256 house was no longer just a bargain. It was a battleground. Jack didn't remove his sunglasses, even though the Arizona afternoon blazed so brightly that the asphalt shimmered behind him. Up close, he looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, not standing on a dusty hill. Tall, lean, late 30s, dark hair perfectly slicked back, jaw sharp as if carved from stone. His tailored suit had not a wrinkle on it, and his polished shoes seemed offended by the dirt beneath them. His voice, when he spoke, was smooth but cold, like someone used to making deals that left the other side with no choice but to nod. He introduced himself calmly. "Jack Morin, Acquisition Division, Silver Point Realty." His tone carried the unshakable confidence of a man who had never once heard the word no matter. Emma stood still, the hem of her red-fitted dress brushing her knees as the hot wind tugged at her hair. Sophie clung to her leg, pastel-pink jacket almost glowing in the harsh sun. Max remained between them and Jack, hackles slightly raised. Jack continued, "That land, your land, was part of a development plan 15 years ago. Complications with the previous owner stalled the project." He flicked a speck of dust from his sleeve with visible annoyance. "But now that you've purchased it, the last missing tile falls into place." Emma crossed her arms. "So what do you want?" Jack's answer was immediate. "To buy it back. You purchased it for $256. I'm offering you 10 times that. Cash. Today." Sophie tightened her hold on Max. The dog let out a low rumble. Emma inhaled slowly. Behind Jack's perfect posture and expressionless face, she sensed impatience, maybe even arrogance, the kind that assumed mothers in red dresses were desperate enough to say yes to anything. But she had a child to protect, and a house to fight for. Inside, they spoke at the kitchen counter Emma had sanded with her own hands. Jack removed his sunglasses then, revealing icy gray eyes, sharp, calculating, yet briefly softening as he scanned the cracked walls and dusty floors, almost as if he didn't expect anyone to live here. He placed a folder on the counter. "You don't have to fight this, Ms. Turner. This home will cost you more in repairs and fines than you can realistically afford." Emma opened the folder. Documents, survey maps, redevelopment plans for an entire block, playgrounds, cafes, condominiums. At the center of everything, her little hill, her house. The home that had held her daughter as she drew stars on ceilings, and the dog who guarded their sleep. Then a line in the city archive papers made her pause. Historic structure, grandfathered in, demolition heavily restricted unless approved through multi-stage review. Her heart surged. She sprinted to the cellar hatch, pulling up the box of old photos and the crumbling journal of Thomas Keller. She flipped pages until she found the notarized draft Keller had nearly completed. His petition to have the home protected under a local heritage clause. Jack's voice flattened. That was never approved. But it was filed, Emma said. And if I push it through, your company can't touch this place without years of legal reviews. For the first time, Jack's expression flickered. Annoyance. Calculation. A realization that the woman in the red dress might not be the easy opponent he expected. Before he could speak, a familiar voice floated from outside. Emma, dear, are you all right? Mrs. Miller stood at the fence, watering can in hand, her floral hat tilted against the sun. Behind her came Carlos, the contractor with broad shoulders, calloused hands, and the patient eyes of someone who had lived enough life to know hardship when he saw it. More neighbors followed, people who had watched the transformation of the $256 house with growing admiration. A young reporter, Emma recognized from a local feature story, stepped forward with a camera. Her name was Leah Dawson, early 20s, short brown hair, freckles across a sun-kissed nose, the eager energy of someone who believed journalism still changed things. Is this about the dispute over Emma's land? She asked, camera already rolling. Jack stiffened. Carlos folded his arms, voice steady but firm. This house is part of this neighborhood's history, and Emma's put more love in it than anyone's seen in decades. Mrs. Miller added, You can't just bulldoze a woman's home because it's convenient for some corporation. The reporter captured every word. With community eyes on him, Jack exhaled sharply. Fine, he said. Silver Point is willing to negotiate, perhaps a collaborative arrangement. In the end, his company offered funds for exterior restoration in exchange for marketing rights, spinning the story as a heritage preservation victory. Emma agreed, not because she trusted them, but because she finally had leverage and allies. By the time the final weeks of summer arrived, the house had changed almost beyond recognition. A solid new roof cast clean shade. Sophie's room glowed with hand-painted constellations. The living room's preserved brick wall shone warmly through afternoon light. The bathroom gleamed. The backyard garden grew in proud, crooked rows, tended by a girl in a pink jacket and a shepherd who supervised every seed. Late one evening, Sophie curled against Max on the sun-warmed porch. Mom, she whispered, we can stay here forever, right? Emma looked at her daughter in the golden light, the child's hair catching the glow, Max's dark brown fur shimmering beside her. Yes, she said, smiling with a steadiness she had never felt before. No one can take this from us now. Max finally relaxed, laying his head on Sophie's lap as the sun dipped behind the hill. Home. The house that once cost only $256 had become something priceless. And as evening wind rustled through the yard, Emma opened the journal again and wrote one final line. Phase forever. Keep the home, keep the family, keep the fight alive. In the quiet glow of that Phoenix sunset, as Emma closed the journal of the man who once dreamed of saving the same broken house, one truth rose gently in her heart. Sometimes miracles don't arrive in thunder or angels' wings. Sometimes they come as a $256 chance, a dusty key, a little girl's laughter, and a loyal shepherd who refuses to leave your side. Some people say blessings are rare, but maybe blessings surround us every day, hidden inside the choices we fear to make, the battles we think we can't win, and the love we give even when our hands are trembling. And perhaps, just perhaps, God places certain struggles in our path not to break us, but to build us, to shape our courage, to remind us we are never alone, to show us that light can grow from ruins, and that a home rebuilt by love becomes sacred ground. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment, tell us your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so more stories of faith, courage, and second chances can find their way to others. May God watch over you, guide your steps, guard your home, and bless your family as He blessed Emma, Sophie, and their loyal shepherd Max. May His light follow you, may His peace rest upon you, and may your own small miracles find you exactly when you need them most. Amen.